On Buddha Day, I'm just going to tell the original central story of awakening, story of Siddhartha Gautama and his quest for awakening, his quest for enlightenment. In what is now Northeastern India, about 2,500 years ago. Yeah. So usually when I tell this story, I start off by saying something like, well, it was 2,500 years ago. That was a long time ago. A very different world, a very different kind of place. But I actually want to give another angle on that today. I want to sort of get you to try and imagine, actually 2,500 years ago, it's not very long ago at all. It's not very long ago at all. Yeah. 2,500 years, it's about 25 to 30 generations of people. Yeah. It's about 25 to 30 generations back. Yeah. So it still might sound quite a lot, but if you think, it's not uncommon to know, maybe you know, or maybe you know someone who has a great grandparent. Yeah. There might be someone who has a young child and there's their parents and their grandparents and their grandparents still alive. Yeah. That wouldn't be that unusual, would it? That's 5 generations. Yeah. So maybe you or maybe someone you know someone across 5 generations. Yeah. So in that context, 25 generations, it's not that long ago, is it? Yeah. Certainly compared, to the amount of time humans have been around, 2,500 years ago, it's a very, very short space of time. Yeah. So I'm just saying that at the start, just to kind of reset our imaginations. This isn't a story about completely different people, ages and ages and ages ago. This is a story about people like us. Yeah, people like us, similar anxieties, similar pleasures, similar hopes, similar desires, similar complexities, and all the rest of it. And yeah, it's the story of Siddhartha Gautama. So one of the things that's told, one of the kind of legends about his story is that his mother actually died giving birth to him. Yeah, and he was brought up by an aunt, I guess, traditional extended family. So let's just start by imagining that. Yeah, a boy growing up, and he starts to notice that all the other children have a mother and a father. And he says, well, where's my mother? Yeah. And he finds out that his mother died giving him life. Just imagine what that might have been like for him. His sense of life, his sense of death, his sense of love and connection. Maybe just imagine what would that have been like for his relationship with his father. Another story about his childhood was that there was a time of conflict. Yeah. So there were 2 neighboring tribes, the Shakyan tribe, which was the tribe that his father was from, and the Kolyan tribe, which was the tribe that his mother had come from. And they were at one time in conflict over the use of water from a river that ran between their territories. And later on, the Buddha, when he became the Buddha, he talked about this. And it's recorded in a sutta, in a text called the Atadanda Sutta. He said this, he said, I'll tell you about the dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over. I saw people thrashing around like fish in water too shallow, so hostile to one another. Seeing this, I became afraid. Very, very strong imagery. People like fish in water too shallow, thrashing around and becoming hostile to one another. Yeah. So obviously that image of fish and water is connected to the river, what the dispute was about, but it's also an image of disorder, of society breaking down, of people panicking and kind of turning against each other and becoming hostile. So yeah, at quite a young age, it seems that he saw that society, civilization, was fragile. It was hostage to fortune. It was something that was made and created out of certain conditions. It was constructed. And that meant it could be unmade. It could actually fall apart if things went wrong, if things changed. And he just saw the horror of that possibility. The horror that people from his mother's tribe and his father's tribe could actually end up fighting and killing each other. Seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. Very strong, very emotional, very kind of visceral language. The sense of a young man who's disturbed, who's deeply troubled by what he sees going on around him. So maybe that crisis passes in time and he grows up. He's from the warrior caste. Apparently in the Shakyan clan that he was part of, the Brahmins hadn't yet got dominance. They were going to become the dominant sort of caste in most of Indian society, but that hadn't happened there. The warriors were, the top. So his father was one of the tribal leaders. And so young Siddhartha is being brought up, probably in a very kind of fortunate, quite privileged upbringing, and being trained to become a leader, to become one of the kind of warrior tribal leaders, as it were. But this deeply troubling sense of the fragility of life won't go away. And I don't mean that in a kind of morbid kind of way. He's just growing up as a self-aware human being, and he's becoming aware of life and death. And he's realizing it would be a kind of denial of his self-awareness. It would be a denial of what it actually is to be a human being, just to pretend that wasn't there, just not to be willing to sort of face that and look at that and contemplate that and move towards that. He wants to fulfill that gift of human self-awareness by looking life fully in the face. The Atadanda Sutta that I quoted from also uses the image of a thorn. He talks about this, that he realizes this thorn lodged deep in his heart. Again, it's a very graphic, visceral image, isn't it? Yeah, this sense of this kind of dull ache. It's always there, and you can't get it out. Yeah, sometimes you sort of forget about it, but then you move the wrong way, and there it is again. Yeah, this piercing sensation in the heart. And maybe what's most remarkable about this young man is that he also seems to have had a sense of another possibility. Yeah. So he's not just pushed from behind by this sense of horror. He's also pulled from above. Yeah. There's an intimation of some other possibility. There's an intimation of something deathless, something wide open and awake. Some kind of freedom, some kind of escape from all of this. And there's a kind of embryonic faith or confidence that can be found, that can be discovered. If he goes looking for it, he will be able to find it. So he says, why do I not seek the unaging, the unailing, the deathless, the sorrowless, and the undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana? So there's this determination to try, to seek, to dare, a confidence that if there is a deathless, he'll be able to find it. It's like he has to try. His questions about life burn too fiercely. They matter too deeply. Whichever way he turns, he can still feel the thorn, and he just can't ignore it. He doesn't want to live an unlived life. I will not die an unlived life. I will not go in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open to me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart, until it becomes a wind, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live. So he knows an unexamined life is not worth living. He has to face life. He won't live always trying to ignore that thorn. So he goes into the forest, a place of snakes, insects, tigers, bandits, maybe even evil spirits, but also a place of solitude, freedom, simplicity, and sheer aliveness. And he joins in with a kind of movement that's happening in India at that time. There's a kind of counterculture, people trying to search for enlightenment, trying not accepting the kind of rituals and beliefs of the time and looking for a deeper truth. They're known as Shravakas. So they go off wandering into the forest, meditating into the forest. Shravakas. Apparently the word means strivers. So they're strivers after truth, strivers after enlightenment. And he joins this way of life, leaving behind the security, the comfort, the status, the safety, and the sense of belonging that he could have had in his life. Yeah? He chooses to risk his significance, in the words of the poem. So just think of the courage, the determination, the willingness to be alone, maybe the idealism of a young man, kind of burning idealism, ardent kind of desire to try and find the truth. So we know that he found certain teachers. Alarma Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta were two of his teachers. They taught these very, very lofty meditative states, which apparently he learnt very quickly. And they were extremely impressed and said, why don't you come and lead my community with me? Maybe they'd taken years to attain these states, and he was able to learn them quite quickly. But he knew that wasn't the answer. He knew that wasn't enough. So he moved on. And then he had a phase of practicing austerities, practicing asceticism. So there was this idea around that pleasure gives rise to craving, and it's craving that binds us to the wheel of life. So we need to shun pleasure, just live a life of extreme denial, extreme self-mortification. Don't let craving get any kind of toehold. Yeah, don't give it anything to hook onto, and that will lead to liberation. That was the kind of vision. That was the kind of theory. Yeah. So he tries it and thinks, well, maybe that's the way. And again, we're told he takes it to an extreme. Takes very, very little food. Doesn't shelter from the sun. Doesn't shelter from the weather. Just sort of extremely kind of austere, hard, ascetic life. Yeah. And there's one little story that apparently one day he's crossing a river, and the river is quite full. Maybe it's around the time of the rains. And he's so weak from this way that he's been living, this way that he's been practicing, that in the swell of the river, he slips and stumbles and nearly drowns. Only just manages to kind of drag himself onto the shore of the river. And he realizes it's futile. He realizes he's just going to kill himself, and he's not getting anywhere nearer this awakening, this enlightenment. It's futile. And so, yeah, he starts to eat food again. And he's got certain friends who are hanging around him, impressed by how far he takes this practice. And they're really disappointed that he started taking food again. And so they give up on him and leave him to it. So maybe then there's a time of crisis. He's alone in the forest. He's been searching now for some years. He's pushed himself. He's tried everything. And he feels no nearer to an answer, no nearer finding this way out, this deathless. So again, maybe try to imagine that. How does he feel? What does he think? Is there a sense of failure and defeat? It seems like nothing has worked. Is there a sense of dejection? A sense of doubt? Maybe there is no way out after all. Maybe this is it. Perhaps there is no deathless after all. It's interesting, in a talk called The Buddha's Victory, Sangharashta, who's the founder of our community, he describes this time as another one of the Buddha's great victories. He says, at this point, Gautama was willing to admit he'd made a mistake, and that was a great victory. Yeah. If you've practiced austerities, or if you've done something very, very hard for a long time and it hasn't worked, there's probably a very strong tendency to kind of dig in and pretend it will work eventually. Yeah. When you've invested in something so much, it's very hard to admit a mistake. Yeah. But young Gautama doesn't do that. He doesn't fall into that kind of very human trap. And then his friends leave him. So again, he's not swayed by popularity. He's not swayed by status or even desire for companionship. He's absolutely set on trying to find the truth. He won't compromise on that. He chooses again to risk his significance. So there is a sense of crisis. You know, everything he's tried so far hasn't worked, and he doesn't know what to do next. So it's a crisis, but it's not a defeat, maybe. Yeah. And sometimes it's in the pressure of a crisis that the ordinary mind gives up. It cracks, and something else shines through. I've actually known this happen to many people, friends of mine, who've, in a moment of crisis, I've had a vision. I've had a sense, a clue about what they need come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you one story. A friend of mine, actually others here might know him. He's died now, but his name was Lakundra. He was an order member. And before he was an order member, he was a heroin addict. I remember him telling me his story. He said, I did 9 years of heroin. And one night, he said it was a Thursday night in 1986. He was in his room somewhere in Croydon, and absolutely at the end of it, just couldn't stand it anymore. I just cannot live this way anymore. Yeah, but he didn't know what to do. How could he get off this thing that he'd been doing for 9 years? Absolutely at rock bottom, utterly desperate. Yeah, and he said that night, a radiant white figure appeared to him and said, "You need to go and learn to meditate." That's what happened. Yeah. How do you explain that? Yeah. I mean, I know him, so I believe him, but I think that is what happened. Yeah. Completely unbidden, completely surprising to him, completely unexpected, just something new. Yeah. So, of course, not everyone who has a vision sees the truth. Yeah. There are sadly, many instances of, distorted, disturbed, deluded visions. But sometimes it seems the pressure of a crisis allows the ordinary mind to give up and open up to something new. By some seeming miracle, it can be receptive and open to what's really there. The truth can shine through. Reality can reveal itself. So speaking metaphorically, it's as if the truth wants to be known. Because it's the truth, because it's just what's there. It's just how things are. And it's like it's trying to find a way to be known. Yeah? It has to kind of take an image. It has to reveal itself. It has to sort of show itself through our imagination, somehow or other. So that's what happens to Gautama in this time of crisis, this time where he doesn't know where to go, all alone in the forest. He has one of these visions. And for him, this truth, this reality, it took the image of a childhood memory. He remembers something from long ago, 20, 25 years ago. Maybe it was something he hadn't thought about for years. And suddenly it's there in his mind, vivid and alive, this memory from the childhood. And not only is it present and vivid in his mind, it has a new meaning. He suddenly sees what it means. It's lit up, an old memory lit up with new significance, illuminated. So the memory is of one springtime when he was a boy, being taken out where they were ploughing the fields. The farm workers were ploughing the fields for the new season, to plant the new crops for that season. Maybe there were even some kind of rituals around that. So it was a bit of an occasion. And he's a young boy, so he's just sort of sat under a tree and sort of left while others are kind of getting on with these rituals and watching what's going on and so on. And it's a very, very sunny day, and it's spring, so maybe you can imagine the sun, it's shining on the fresh green leaves. He's sitting under a rose apple tree, which is in blossom. So maybe there's this beautiful white blossom, which is sort of sparkling a bit in the sunlight. It's very, very beautiful. It's very, very peaceful. It's very, very lovely. And just quite naturally, spontaneously, he goes into a state of peacefulness and blissfulness as a child. Just quite naturally and unbidden. This is what happens. Maybe some of you have got children, or those of us who sometimes do school visits here and do little meditations with children know this does happen. Actually, you do a meditation with a group of children. They're the ones that kind of fidget and giggle, and then that you afterwards you notice some who've really been meditating. So anyway, that's what Gautama remembers. He remembers this lovely scene and how it transported him into this very, very natural, unforced, lovely, blissful meditative state. And he says, remembering this, he says, why do I live fearing this pleasure? So formerly, he's lived this life of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, the life of his youth, and the warrior training and just a quite privileged life of pleasure. But even in part of that reclusive meditative life, those teachers were just teaching him the most kind of blissful states that they knew how to attain, how to get into. It was still a life of chasing bliss, chasing ecstasy, looking for the highest pleasure that was possible. A life of seeking pleasure and running away from pain. And then he'd lived this ascetic life, this austere life, avoiding pleasure because it was a trap that would lead you into craving. So leading now a life of avoiding pleasure, aversion to pleasure, something to be feared. Life as a trap, life as of avoidance. And now, as a result of this childhood memory, he says, why do I live fearing this pleasure? He realizes neither of these are freedom. There's the hunting and chasing all the time, or there's the avoiding being caught and trapped all the time. None of those is freedom. Neither of those is any way to live. He's still oscillating between pleasure and pain. He's still stuck in this game of opposites. So later on, after his enlightenment, he expressed the futility of this in a famous verse. Many a birth have I undergone, keeping on in the round of existence, seeking the builder of this house and not finding him. Painful as such repeated birth. Yeah. So this sense of just going round and round, chasing, avoiding, and just the kind of sheer endlessness of it, a claustrophobic kind of wearying sense of limitation. Is that all there is to life? Just that, keeping going. And again, feeling and sensing that there must be some other kind of possibility. But he realizes he still hasn't worked out who builds that house of pleasure and pain. How is it built? How do you get out? Hasn't yet got to the house building. Hasn't yet seen the real root of the problem. Why do I live fearing this pleasure? Yeah. So in that line, there's a kind of insight into, he realizes he's fearing pleasure. He's still trapped. Even the austere ascetic life is still trapped in the game of pleasure and pain. But then he's also saying, why do I live fearing this pleasure? There's this childhood memory of this just natural, innocent, pure pleasure, the beauty of sitting under the tree in the spring and going into this meditative state. Why do I live fearing that pleasure? Yeah. So he starts to see that there are different kinds of pleasure. Yeah. There's what came to be known as sammisa, or worldly pleasure. So we crave something outside us, food, a drink, a cigarette, a nice house, a career, a holiday, a nice quiet life, whatever it is, yeah? We just want something to take away the pain and fill the sense of emptiness. And it may work for a while, but it only works for a while, yeah? Because it's based on a certain kind of grasping, certain kind of trying to appropriate something from outside us and sort of stick it onto us, yeah? Hasn't really changed us, hasn't really changed our mind and our heart. And so eventually it passes, and then we just come back to ourselves as we were, yeah? Or back to ourselves as we were again. And so it feels unsatisfying, and so we try to repeat, yeah? And we try to repeat, yeah? So this sense of worldly pleasure and this cyclic, repetitive, even addictive kind of pattern that it gets you into. But this memory of the rose apple tree makes him realize there's another kind of pleasure. There's what's called niramisa, or unworldly pleasure. So instead of grasping and clinging, there's love, there's appreciation, there's a sort of turning into the richness and abundance and creativity of your own mind. And there's a sort of turning out into the richness and beauty of the world around. And when we relate to things in that kind of way, we're actually changed, we're uplifted, we're expanded. And that creates a deeper pleasure and deeper fulfillment that lasts longer and that's healthy and innocent and, good. So this is the pleasure of the meditation that he remembered. It's the pleasure of real communication, of beauty, of serving others, of love, and so on. So he realizes that the ascetic way that he was practicing, in a way, it did rightly see craving, worldly pleasure, as the problem, as a trap, as something that kind of ensnares and entangles us. But he realized it hadn't seen the way out because it only identified that kind of cyclic, repetitive mode of mind. Yeah. It was just by trying to sort of stop pleasure. It was just trying to sort of stop that, kind of freeze that, stop something from happening. Yeah. And now he sees that there's another tendency of mind. There's another mode of being. There's another kind of potential, inherent or latent in any moment, any situation. because he's sort of uncoupled seeing any kind of pleasure as related to craving. He's sort of seen the different kinds of worldly and unworldly pleasure. He can now see something new. He can now see this new possibility, this new way. Yeah? He sees that there's also a kind of innately creative, growing, expanding, spiraling up and out of mind that's always there, that's always possible. Yeah? He sees that you can't just stop the wheel. You can't just try and not act and stop the process of karma. You have to do something else as well. Our energy, our desire, our life force needs somewhere to go. It needs to be transformed and transmuted. And that there's a spiraling, creative unfolding of mind in which deeper motivations and energies, not based on craving, not even based on ego, become stronger and stronger. And he realizes this is the way. He sees the wheel and he also sees the spiral. He sees the worldly, but now he's really starting to see the unworldly and how it unfolds. So this memory of the rose apple tree, it's not just something that happened before the Enlightenment. In a way, I would see it as it's the beginning of the awakening process. It's tremendously significant. It's the crucial insight, a crucial understanding, which allows the awakening process to start to unfold, to start to happen. So he takes food, he regains his strength, and he finds a beautiful place by the river Niranjana. It's near a village where he can collect alms. And we don't know how long he was there for, whether it was days, weeks, months. But he just stays there meditating and giving himself to this creative unfolding of the moment. And just now I quoted the first verse of the house builder verse, that wearying search for the build of the house, that longing for freedom. Yeah. And of course, there's another verse that goes with that. There's a second verse, also very famous. And just to say, these two verses together, they're reputed. The tradition is they're the very first words of the Buddha after his enlightenment. The first words of awakening in the world. So I'll just read them both together. Many a birth have I undergone, keeping on in the round of existence, seeking the builder of this house and not finding him. Painful is such repeated birth. O house builder, now you are seen. Never again will you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken. Your ridgepole is shattered. The worldly conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. So yeah, this image of seeing the house builder. And because the house builder is seen, we won't enclose him again in another house. So who is the house builder? So yeah, the house builder is craving, you could say. This kind of clinging and craving that leads to a sense of lack, leads to a sense of emptiness. And because we feel empty, it leads to a sense of a stronger kind of polarization between self and world. A stronger sense of a little self in here trying to kind of get something out from there, which it feels separate and alienated from. Yeah. We tend to think it's the other way around. We tend to think a sense of lack leads to craving. But the Buddha, in his teaching, he often turned things upside down, put them on their head, as it were. And he said in a way, no, it's craving that leads to lack. And maybe if you think about it, think about your experience, you can see that that's true. So, for example, I can be perfectly happy, perfectly content, maybe walking down the high street. And then I go in a bookshop and I start looking at the books. And suddenly, I need those books. Yeah. One moment I was content and happy, and then I feel a sense of emptiness and like, wouldn't my life be better if they were on my bookshelf at home? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Something triggers my craving. And then suddenly there's a sense of lack and a strong sense of a self wanting something. Yeah. In that moment, that's what the craving constructs and creates. Yeah. Or the same in meditation. You're quite happily there in your meditation. And then suddenly little thought, little fantasy, and you're into craving. And again, the sense of emptiness, the sense of lack. Yeah. So yeah, then we feel isolated and alienated. Then we feel insecure. And we just want to build a house. We want to sort of construct something to make ourselves feel safe. So this house and the house builder, the house, it's a very, very rich symbol. Yeah. If you think about houses in our culture, they're what people spend the most time and money on in their lives, aren't they? And we decorate our houses and we fill them with things which sort of express who we are. Houses are a sort of symbol of status, of identity, of taste, of what we really kind of long for and yearn for in life, as it were. Yeah. So the house is a symbol of security, of refuge, home, safety, comfort, and all the rest of it. So yeah, the house is a symbol of security that we seek, that we try to build in our lives. And what the Buddha is saying is, well, because the house is a symbol of security, that also means that it's a symbol of insecurity. Yeah. Deeper down, it's a symbol of the insecurity that we're trying to sort of constantly get away from, or constantly try to solve, or constantly try to sort of shore up. Yeah. The fear and anxiety, the kind of desire to control our lives, closing off from some things, trying to keep them out, holding on to other things, trying to kind of keep them in. All that is symbolized, in this image of a house. Yeah. Constantly kind of patching it up, keeping it going, kind of unresting activity. So yeah, the house symbolizes, in a way, the house of self, the house of me and mine. Yeah. The things that we cling to and to try and bolster a sense of self, the views and ideas about that we cling to kind of give ourselves a sense of status and identity and all that. Yeah. So it's a very, very strong image, isn't it? This image of he's seen the house builder. He's not going to have another house built for him. He's destroyed the house. The rafters are broken. The ridgepole is shattered. The worldly mind, it's destroyed. He's seen through it. Yeah. He doesn't want to live in this confined, boxed-in, claustrophobic, fearful kind of way. He sees how unnecessary it all is. And there's this tremendous relief, tremendous freedom. So he realized, yeah, all those worldly pleasures, all that kind of worldly praise and status and all the rest of it, it just depends on external conditions. And those external conditions inevitably come and go. They're contingent. They can't always be controlled. And that's what causes our human sense of insecurity and anxiety. And it's not like he won't attend to practical matters. It's not like, even if the Buddha was living in our culture today, he would live in a house. Yeah. Of course, one can try and arrange things for the best. But for an enlightened being, they're not kind of dependent on that kind of worldly outcome. They've completely tapped into that spiraling, expansive, creative tendency of mind. They're living now completely from that. So whatever happens, however worldly things turn out, they'll be equally creative. They'll just respond to it equally creatively. And that means whatever happens, however things turn out, they'll be equally joyful. Yeah. Because it's the creativity that's the real joy. Yeah. That's where the real joy comes from. Yeah. Yeah. So he's discovered this, he's now completely in this sort of spiraling creative mode of mind. It's a total creativity, which in a way is a total freedom from external conditions. Because whatever happens, he might try to get this rather than that, but totally open to responding creatively whatever happens. And in that creativity is, pure joy, pure kind of release of energy and joyfulness, yeah, unreserved joyfulness. So, O house builder, now you are seen. Never again will you build me a house. So I'm going to switch the metaphor around, yeah. So he's not attached to any house. So if you think about it, what that means is he's at a home anywhere and everywhere. Yeah. The Buddha is now completely and utterly at home in the universe. Yeah. His home is nowhere. His home is everywhere. Yeah. There's no more me and mine or clinging to me and mine. There's no kind of owning. There's total belonging. He belongs to everything. He belongs everywhere. Yeah. He's now living from a deep sense of connection, a deep sense of fellow feeling with everything, sense of non-separation. Yeah. And this is illustrated actually in quite a few stories from after the Enlightenment. I'll just very, very briefly tell a couple of the stories. So one is the story of Muchalinda. So there's a story that in the time, after the Enlightenment, where he's still hanging out in that place by the river under the Bodhi tree, there's an unseasonable storm, great kind of thunder and lightning and torrential rain. And he's just sitting there meditating. And this great snake, this huge serpent, cobra, coils himself round the Buddha 7 times and then puts his head with his big kind of cobra hood over the head of the Buddha and shelters him from the storm. I mean, maybe to us it's quite a strange image. But one way you could take that is it's an image of complete oneness with the world, complete oneness with nature. Yeah. The snake just looks after and protects the Buddha. Yeah. He's not separate from the world. There is nothing to fear, nothing to feel alienated from. Yeah. Another one of these lovely stories is there's a tradition that when he finally left that place where he'd gained enlightenment, the last thing he did before he left was he gazed at the tree. This tree that had sheltered him and that in a way had looked after him during that incredibly significant time. He just looked at the tree with a sense of love, a sense of gratitude, and he bowed to the tree. He felt grateful to the tree. Yeah. Again, just a story of living from a deep, deep sense of at-homeness in the universe, non-separation from everything. So what does he do now? Yeah. Just going to talk about one last incident before we leave the Buddha. So yeah, there's another story that in this time, in the sort of post-enlightenment period, he starts to wonder what to do next. He's only in his early 30s, we think. So he's got, most of his life hopefully ahead of him. What do I do? And it occurs to him that he can try and share this enlightenment, this insight, this awakening with others. But he's sort of not sure. He has a doubt. He realizes it'd be quite difficult and it would be hard work and it won't be easy to explain. And so first of all, he's minded, maybe I won't do that. maybe it's not possible. I don't know whether other people will kind of get this. He's minded just to sort of stay where he is and just live a quiet life of enlightenment. And the story goes that a figure called Brahma Sahampati, who's this great sort of radiant, godlike figure, not God with a capital G, God with a small g, but very kind of radiant figure. He realizes what's going on with the Buddha in the mind of the Buddha, and he comes down and he kneels before the Buddha and says, no, please do teach. Please do try and share what you've discovered with others. There will be some who will understand and they need to hear. So please do teach. He entreats the Buddha. This is the story. So maybe it's a bit of a strange story, isn't it? Like, why would the Buddha doubt? Wasn't being a very compassionate Buddha, was he? To think, this might be too hard work. Maybe I won't bother. What does this story mean? So I just briefly want to mention some possible interpretations. They're from Sangharakshita, our founder teacher. One of the brilliant ways Sangharakshita teaches the Dharma is he's actually a very, very good storyteller and a very, very good interpreter of the stories. You can read many things by him where he's brilliantly brings out the symbolism of the stories. And he's commented quite a lot on this particular incident. So, for example, there's one place where he talks about it. It's this story of the Buddha and Brahma Sahampati. It's getting at the nature of communication. That you can't just communicate from one way. Yeah, you have to be asked. There has to be a sense of someone there who wants to hear something. And Brahma Sahampati coming down and asking is symbolizing that. Do you see what I mean? Symbolizing that kind of entreaty, that receptivity, that two-way nature of communication. And the Buddha sort of had to feel that before he could try to communicate. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is Sangharakshita sees this little story as the final stage of the Buddha's enlightenment. That maybe there's still a hint of separation. There's still a hint, or even a sort of thought that he might be able to kind of keep it to himself. And then through this process, he realizes that's impossible. Yeah. Sangharakshita says it's the Buddha overcoming the Buddha. Very interesting phrase. A lot to reflect on there. The Buddha even overcomes the Buddha. This sense that I have gained enlightenment. No. This is something that just has to be shared, given freely. Yeah. Another reflection on this little incident is the Buddha's just realizing it's a vast gap between him and others. What he's discovered is so profound, so extraordinary. But yeah, and so beyond words and concepts. How do you communicate it? He really doesn't know how he's going to do it. He really doesn't know if it's going to be possible. Yeah. So this story symbolizes the fact that it's not just a straightforward matter. It's a huge, vast gap. And yeah, he has to come to a realization, or like, I don't know, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try and share this with others. So Brahma Sahampati entreats and makes his request. And then what happens is the Buddha has another vision. In meditation, his mind is illuminated once more. Yeah. And he has this vision of a lake of lotuses. Yeah. Maybe a vast lake of lotuses, maybe almost like an ocean of lotuses. Yeah. And some of the lotuses are down in the mud at the bottom of the lake. They're stuck in the mud. They're covered in mud. They're kind of stunted, trying to kind of grow, but struggling right down at the bottom of the lake. Yeah. Some of them are starting to grow up through the water. Some of them are even starting to break the surface of the lake. And some of them are starting to open out. And what's emerging is this pure, beautiful lotus flower. Yeah. That's what he sees in that moment. So it's a vision of humanity. It's a vision that all these lotuses have that potential for growth and unfolding. Some of them are stuck and completely immersed and submerged, but some of them will have the right conditions. Some of them are more ready. Some of them are going to be able to break the surface of the water and open up into beautiful lotus flowers. So he now knows his life's work. He now sees his life's meaning and fulfillment. He sees the profound, beyond personal significance of opening the doors of the deathless. He sees, if you like, his responsibility, his role, his significance, what he can do. Wide open are the portals of the deathless. Let those who hear show faith, he says. So he knows his life's work, though, of course, he's no idea how it will work out. No idea where it will take him. I will not die an unlived life. I will not go in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open to me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live, so that that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom. And that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. So he bows to the tree and he leaves that beautiful place and he goes out into the world. Curious, open, friendly, searching for those who might listen. He's ready to pass on the seeds of wisdom that have come to him so that they might become blossom and fruit in the hearts and the minds of countless other men and women. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic talk, Vajragupta. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've heard the story of the Buddha so many times and it felt fresh and new again, and other details came to the fore that I'd forgotten about. Yeah, that phrase of the Buddha, overcoming the Buddha, I just feel that will give me lots to carry on reflecting, and just that kind of repetition, that mantra of I will not live an unlived life. Yeah, it's just sort of stirs my energy. I'm sure it stirs a lot of people here. So really, really big thank you for a fantastic talk.